And we're back. All right. Week
Hey,
2 of Writer's Workshop. Here we're discussing this week the best themes. In the future, I hope to actually get some writing prompts together and discuss what we do for those very specific prompts, and maybe even write something before coming in for one of these. But that's going to take some more planning. For today, though, let's go ahead and take a look at the best themes in writing. And with me this week, again, it's PJ again. Welcome back, PJ.
hi Alex.
How you doing there?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's good to be back.
After all of 10 minutes that we had between podcast 1 and podcast 2. Yep.
Well, exactly. Yeah, it's just a delight to be back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I missed this conversation, so
I
let's get
was
let's get cracking.
I'm really happy with how our conversation went last week. We were able to think about some pieces we want to actually write. We got some much clearer direction on them, I hope. And
Yeah,
yeah, maybe we can do that today as well.
yeah. Let's go ahead.
So, I got to ask
All
you,
right.
what's your
Mhm.
favorite theme in literature?
Favorite. Got me there. It's a difficult one. We talked about it, but the favorite one is impossible. So I'm just going to mention.
All
I'm
right.
going to start off. Was one. Well, they're all pretty negative actually, aren't they? But I'm going to start off with psychological illness because that was the one I personally chose. So that's one theme
I thought you were
I
being
think is
facetious
very.
because we were just discussing this before we started recording, but you're actually conflicted.
No, yeah, definitely. And I think that's a theme that's very interesting. And it's just not. No one really deals with this theme. It's only become a bit more commonplace. I feel honestly in the last 20 or 30 years. So I feel that's also very interesting.
Is there a special type of mental illness that you're thinking about?
Well, I think what two actually. It's this going crazy, which is more of a traditional sort of It's not seen as psychological illness, but it's more the traditional Shakespeare, Medea, so ancient Greek plays. They did it. I think that's very interesting. But I'm also just interested in just depression and manic depression in particular. I feel is very interesting. Also, schizophrenia, for example. So these, no one talked about this. I mean, before people actually started talking about this openly, no one really wrote about this either. I feel like there are very few. I mean, there are very few kind of old books that mention mental illness. That's a topic I find very interesting, and I feel like and when you're writing, it's such a great theme to use because when you're watching a film or even when you're watching something on stage, it's very hard to portray mental illness. If you can do it, then you've accomplished something fantastic. But to be honest, if you're a layman in writing, then psychological illness is very easy because you're just writing down the mental illness, the broken language on paper. So I feel like it's a great thing to talk about and to discuss, to read about if you're unaware of it.
So you're
Not
talking
just, but
about
I'm not.
One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
I'm talking. Well, for example, yes. I had in mind, as I mentioned before, I had in mind Philip K. Dick
Mm.
because he's famous now for, well, Blade Runner and all these science fiction action movies, Minority Report. But he was a schizophrenic, and when you read his books, there are two things about his books. First of all, he mentions psychological illnesses openly and talks about it. And secondly, when you read it, in my opinion, his books, he's considered, by the way, the Shakespeare of science fiction. But the way you read Philip K. Dick is sometimes you feel like he's not a good writer. I have to say that you sometimes feel like he's not a good writer in the sense that sometimes it's just not clear. It's not even vague. It just becomes very odd the way he describes something, writes, also semantically, grammatically, everything. And then it becomes good again. There's kind of this flow in writing in the same book. So why do androids dream of electric sheep, which became Blade Runner? It's not even psychedelic. It just becomes very schizoid at
Hmm.
parts,
And the
and
writing
I
kind
find that's very interesting.
of portrays that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Hmm, hmm,
exactly.
interesting.
Yeah. So I find that very interesting, and I love books like Ulysses or Ulysses from James Joyce. I mean, or for example, this the one of the narratives in Cloud Atlas. So I mean, the book, not the film. Both the storylines they're broken up because the characters are mad or they're becoming mad, and basically the narrative gets lost or gets confused in a stream of schizophrenia of madness, basically. Now I like that, but some people might think that's very pretentious. And I just want to add to finish that off that I think if you're portraying an illness realistically without becoming experimental,
Mm.
um, for example, as it's done in the film Silver Lining Playbook. Have you ever seen that?
I have not, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, you should watch it. It's a great movie, I think, because it portrays manic depression at least. So it's not this kind of crazy going mad talk, just manic depression, and the film portrays it very realistically. It's not just a tragic thing; it can be funny sometimes as well. So I
Oh,
like that. Yeah, I like it when it's not too dark either. So I like that you can add some humor to it, but also talk about realistically without stereotypes again.
definitely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful Mind is one of those, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And actually, I'm just looking up because I had an idea. I lost the idea of what I was going to say. So I'm
Yeah.
looking up those that are movies about mental health. And actually, one I've heard the most about is Inside Out. Not hearing about it as in I've heard about this movie. No, I've seen it quite a couple times, actually. Quite a couple.
Yeah.
But you get to see the character go through a move, experience depression, and what
Yeah.
sadness can be like. But another thing is that I've really heard this be used by quite a few therapists with children. So, kids who are
Oh,
experiencing
really?
depression, this is the perfect way for a lot of therapists to discuss with children.
Oh, really?
So they'll like, all right, so this is sadness, this is anger, and this is what it's like in your mind right now. And
Oh,
here's
that's
what we
interesting. Yeah.
have to do to help you in the future to make it really easy for kids to picture what's going on inside of them.
So again, look, it can be used to help others, basically. So when we talked about literature helping people,
Yeah.
even talking about mental illness, it obviously helps if it helps the kids,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's great. And I suppose it's the way you describe it, right? So I mean, if it's Inside Out and it's Disney movie anyway, but I think that's the best way to treat mental illnesses to explain mental illnesses for children. Don't give them Hamlet or something like that. Give them
Well, I was going to say
maybe
King Lear, but yes.
yeah, okay, but don't give them any bloodthirsty kind of going over the top crazy. Just
Yeah.
explain it using childlike imagery and metaphors. Inside Out, because Inside Out is so metaphorical the whole time, so it explains it realistically, but it doesn't give you the medical jargon. It's always these characters, right? The angry character or the happy one. That's a great movie.
For the adults, just
Hmm.
watch a Kubrick film. That would be good.
Why? Well, yeah, they're a lot more. I think it's easier for adults. You have to be careful about kids. So it's a great
Oh,
job
yeah.
that they did something for Inside Out. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was for adults. You see, explaining mental illness is better if you have kind of a comedy or something light because it's such a heavy subject. And to actually experience what it'd be like to have it, that's a different thing. You go darker and you go Philip K. Dick or you go Shakespeare. I think at least it's also important to not experience that, to observe that. Some people think it's not important. Some people think it's just damaging, watching American Psycho or something like that.
It
Um,
really
so,
depends on the
yeah.
state of mind that you're in and the type of thing that you need. I think American Psycho is probably not great for people who feel
Oh,
psychopathic or sociopathic.
well, yeah.
Uh,
It reminds me. It reminds me of what's it called? Film therapy. Have you heard about this? Or movie therapy? We're actually
okay.
actual therapists. They use films to treat people.
I know of art therapy since my friend's one of them, but I haven't heard much
Yeah,
about movie therapy.
it's part of our therapy. I think it's deviated from it.
Oh, okay.
It's that basically. So they actually prescribe films to you. So if you and someone and someone did it in the UK. There is a different thing. In the UK, there's a poet going around who owns a poetry pharmacy, and that's so basically she moves around the
Okay.
UK prescribing poems to sick people. So I mean, honestly, I love those kind of ideas. Just helping people who are sick mentally with art, with literature,
Yeah.
or films.
I find for me that a lot of the
So,
time, like, since I've also had to deal with mental illness here and there,
oh,
like, just letting loose at times. So watching those that
oh,
have that very emotional, heartfelt ending, those are
as
the
well.
ones that really help me a bit. So, like,
And
I don't know if you saw the most recent podcast, not for the listeners, that would be 2 weeks ago, but the one about Shakespeare and some of the best speeches from Shakespeare.
I haven't seen it yet.
That's all right. The last one is King Lear right after his spoilers for a 500-year-old play, 400-year-old play, when yeah, when his daughter Cordelia dies. And it's one of the most moving speeches, and you just feel good at the end. Not in that like it's a positive thing, but it's that you can experience the sadness, get the sadness out of you in a way, and appreciate the beauty.
I know what you mean. Yeah. Catharsis, right? I mean, they did this back in
Exactly. Yeah.
ancient Greece, yeah. And I think they valued the plays more. I mean, they valued the tragedies anyway more than the comedies, and they valued the tragedies that had the best catharsis. So where the people cried collectively the most to get all that bad energy out was the idea.
Mm.
It's kind of a treatment, right? Collective treatment, and it still works. I mean, that's why people go to movies. They sometimes they go to have a good time. Sometimes they actually go for a good cry, and movie therapy also has that. They have some movies where you should cry if you need to release tension.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Goodwill Hunting. Like,
yeah, exactly. There you go.
but
Yeah, you mentioned that.
you have to be in the right mood at times too.
Getting me what I mean, and that's why this, you're prescribed a certain movie. I mean, ideally, we could just prescribe the perfect movie for each other, or we can maybe do that. Or, I mean, we actually do that. To be honest, we do say that, if you're feeling down, I might recommend a movie, and you do the same. If I say that I have this particular issue or something like that, oh, maybe read that or watch that or listen to that music as well.
It depends on the mood. Yeah. Do you want something that's
Exactly.
going to pick you up and be really happy? Do you want it to be funny?
Yeah,
Do you want it to be depressing as hell?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes to moving to a subject that you mentioned. So that's like handling loss.
Yes.
That's also the same kind of thing, right? I mean,
Just like as I was
so
mentioning with King Lear and Cordelia. And we were discussing before this podcast started a little bit about Woman in the Dunes, right?
mm,
I always imagine that as experiencing loss. So basically, the synopsis for the first part of the movie, this came out in what, 1960 or so?
1962 the novel and 1964 the film.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And basically, this teacher was kidnapped and forced to live with this woman in a like burrowed out sand dune. He can't escape whatsoever. They're not letting him escape, and he has to
Yeah, so
just
it's like
deal.
a sand pit, really, more, isn't it? Like a
Yeah.
huge hole can't get out of yet.
And it's basically they kidnapped him just because their village is going to die out unless they get more people because
Great
people
plot.
want to leave
Okay.
and go to Tokyo.
It's a great plot, actually. Yeah. I love it.
And
Yeah, yeah.
he experiences the loss of his daily life. He experiences the loss of other things that should we spoil it? Again,
We don't have to spoil. I don't think. No, no, you don't. You
okay.
think that's clear enough? Like he does certain things that he like. It's not really important the details, right? Because I think the novel is also vague. It's kind of. I
Hmm.
mean, Junpei Miki, the protagonist, he's a very vague protagonist, and talking about Japan in the last episode, he's also really passive. It's a bit like your idea of trying to make the audience active, I suppose, and but it's doing that with the character. It's trying to make the character active because he's a passive character and he's forced to be passive, so he's going to be active now. But he's also mourning the loss, as you say, right? It's kind of like it's death in some sense, it's death of his life.
Yep.
So he's mourning with. Yeah.
And you get to see him change mentally, and so
Mm.
it's not a mental illness unless I don't think
Well,
the
could.
DSM has
So what, like, you don't think it could be classified as a psychological illness?
what is that called when you're taken and
Stockholm syndrome.
thank you. So yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think that Stockholm syndrome is probably in
Yeah.
the DSM. I could be wrong about that,
If
but
it's not, it should be, though, I feel like. It's not specifically about psychological illness. It is that Stockholm syndrome. I feel like it is indirectly about psychological damage, at least.
oh yeah,
When he is suffering from loss, as all movies and stories and books are about loss are.
yeah, it's
Yeah, no,
beautifully
that's.
done. There's a reason it has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Does it? Okay.
It does.
Great. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And by the way, just to you listeners, it's a great novel by Kobo Abbott, and the film is by Teshuga Hara. Both are great. So
The
if
film
you're
is on
if you're the one,
YouTube and
and
subtitled.
and usually I prefer watching the book, but to be honest, the movie made by his friend is such a great adaptation. Go ahead and watch it. It's really faithful to the novel.
I'm going to say I
But
saw
yeah, that's
quite a few comments saying I prefer the movie to the book. I can't make
okay.
that
Okay.
decision because
Ooh,
I've not read the book, but it
okay.
apparently gives it a run for its money.
Fair enough. Yeah. But I feel the themes are the same. It's kind of not wanting to accept and the loss. I mean, it is an existentialist novel. And existentialism is about, kind of being afraid of existence, of also this having this, what is existence and
Mm.
what am I doing? It's a crisis, and a loss always leads to a crisis. So he's having this crisis. So I love this theme as well, handling loss, because I
Oh
love
yeah.
the theme of a midlife crisis, of just crisis in general in someone's life, because it always leads to interesting character developments and stories.
Yep.
So
There are
it's always a story,
the options
that
are
comes from it.
limitless with this one.
Yeah,
Like there's
yeah,
always
definitely.
something interesting you can do with these types of characters.
Oh, yeah, because you never know how they react.
Yep.
Now, have you actually seen Old Boy by Park Chan-wook?
No, I have not.
So it's based on a Japanese manga, and it was adapted to South Korean film. So Park Chan-wook, he made a lot of really violent films that are also very philosophical. So I really recommend his movies. But someone asked him, why are his movies always violent and sexual? He said, "Oh, are you into that or what?" And he said, "No, no, I actually abhor violence and I'm scared of it." Didn't mention the sex part, cheeky Park Chan-wook. But the point is that he said violence and sex always brings out the beast in a human being. Not in the bad way. He just means that it brings out the naked self. And I think that's very relevant in East Asian society where everyone's kind of hiding, as we mentioned, the status quo. In his movies or in this book, Women and Dunes, or when you're handling loss, all of a sudden your protective shield are torn off you, like your clothes are torn off, you're naked, and you don't know how you will react. You will react in some sense either violently, but it could be violently outwards or it could be violently inwards. And yeah, it's just fun. As you mentioned, the possibilities are endless. If you want to
Mm.
write a story, handling loss, I mean, it opens so many doors for you. The only problem is, I think you have to be genuine about it, and you have to be careful in your phrasing, and you have to be. I don't recommend going over sentimental with something what might happen. You have to keep it a bit cool, I find, actually, when you're talking about handling loss.
There are
Definitely,
pitfalls for sure, and there are those
yeah.
that are just melancholic just to be melancholic. Those are dreadful to sit through. And like that's a lot of what my poetry was, and that's what a lot of poetry still is.
In general.
Not
Yeah, in
just
general,
me,
yeah.
but just in general. And
Mm.
it is boring. Speaking of like what you were saying there, you've heard of the four F's: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. You're put in a difficult situation. What are you going to do? Are you going to fight? Are
Yeah.
you going to run away? Are you going to just do nothing? And fawn, I forget actually. Oh yeah, you're trying to do like the diplomatic approach, basically.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is always trying to deal with the situation.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, got it.
Like imagine you have
And
a parent who's abusing you, or abusing your brother or sister, and
yeah.
you go trying to please your parents so that they don't do anything to your brother or sister.
Hmm.
Like that's one of those
Right, I
things.
get it.
Just
Yeah.
trying to get them on your side and try to protect people.
So the thing about this theme is, as you just mentioned, there's a whole narrative there. It's like a four-piece narrative. And I think, as we mentioned, Shakespeare, all his tragedies, they're all lost plays. I mean, a
By
tragedy seems to
definition,
be
basically.
always. Also, fun fact, by the way. Here's a little fun fact. Tragedy means, as you might know, Alex, it means the song of the goat,
I did not
because
know
the
that.
ancient Greeks, well, the ancient Greeks thought that the sound the goat makes sounds very sad. So they decided to
Mm.
call tragedy Tragos Eidos, so Tragos goat, Eidos song, song of the goat. So there you go. So I feel like, what's the point of that? Just a little fun fact.
It is
But,
a very interesting fact, actually. I'd never heard of it.
but, but not really relevant, I think. Oh yeah, except the point is that sadness, tragedy. Well, there's nothing sadder than loss. That's what I was going for.
Yeah.
And that's also, by the way, why you see not so much nowadays, but in some older stories, you saw the goat as a tragic sort of sign, or it has a negative sign of death.
Yeah,
Um,
usually like demonic, I
yeah,
guess, is the
exactly.
image
Yeah,
I have.
exactly.
But then even
Why?
before that though, in like druidic culture, I believe it was seen as something more positive, right? I could be wrong,
I'm not sure about that.
but it's fair.
Could be, yeah. Well, that's a different theme altogether, isn't it? The animals and symbolism is also very
Oh,
interesting.
yes.
Yeah, handling loss. I mean, yeah, I mean, Macbeth is the best one, right? for
You
that.
could debate Hamlet.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you mentioned King Lear, right?
of
So I
course.
mean,
And
so those are the three.
I was looking at a ranking of Shakespeare plays, and they had Macbeth tied with King Lear, and
Okay.
I don't see that personally, but
Okay. Fair
very,
enough. Yeah.
very different plays.
I also mentioned to you the film, and it's also a book, The Descendants. So the films with George Clooney, and basically it's a very effective movie because, and I think it's also very important about stories again, because I grew up on an island, so and this is set in Hawaii, so there's never a best story. It's just the one that relates to you the most. But this one is a very good movie about handling loss because his wife is in a coma after an accident, after a boat accident, and he finds out that she had an affair, but
Hmm.
she's in a coma, and actually she's about to die actually, and so the whole movie is about him just coping with loss and coping with not having talked with his wife before, and dealing with it because he's angry and sad, and he has two daughters and trying to deal with the whole situation. What I like about the movie though, it's never melodramatic, or at least it never goes over the top. It's very low key. I mean, the soundtrack is very low key. The acting is very quiet. It's a very quiet movie just in general. You hear the sea the whole time. I personally love that stuff, that it deals with such a serious topic where usually people are screaming in these kind of movies and getting angry. But in this case, you see him going inwards, and just the real tragedy is in his eyes, not what he's doing. And it's harder though in plays, especially. In plays, you have to really express yourself. Easier with a movie with the soundtrack, right? Sound effect as well.
Well, you could still
But
have
yeah,
music in plays, but yeah, movies are much easier because you can
it's like
zoom in. You can
and
actually
the
see
editing,
the eyes. The editing
Yeah,
also very important. I agree.
yeah.
So, kind of an interesting transition here. We're talking about the more solemn version of mental illnesses. The other thing that I
Hmm.
find really interesting is just pure chaos and madness, and just those that love causing so much pandemonium. One that
You
I
mentioned
think that's really
King Lear.
important would be Alex from Clockwork Orange.
All right, yeah,
Like
definitely.
Malcolm McDowell, man, he is
Yeah.
so good in that role.
Yeah.
I tried reading the book. I need to try it again. Did you ever read it?
Yeah, I read the book and well, watched the film, but I think the film is a bit better than the book. Didn't enjoy the book so much.
Yep.
You see, the book also has the definitive last chapter. Well, it could be a spoiler, so I'm not going to say it actually. The film ends in such a way that Alex is a really nasty piece of work, and that's what you talk about. However, the book it becomes very religious at the end, so I'm not going to
Okay.
mention.
Like in the
There's a way,
movie,
but it's
he's a
interesting
nasty
though.
piece of work, so you get to see
Yeah,
that just terrible chaos that he causes. But
yeah,
then you get to see this very famous scene with his eyes being held open and
yeah,
him screaming in the chair. And you get to
yeah,
see him enter a different form of madness. It's
yeah.
really interesting to experience. And so, like, that's one of the Joker, of course, from Batman. It's hard to do the Joker wrong, but it's been done before.
Yeah, it's been done before, but I mean, but yeah, but you feel like how can it go wrong? I mean, it feels like an actor's dream, right, to do that role. I feel
Yeah.
because he can just be crazy, crazy, crazy. I mean, go really over the top.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I know
Suicide
what you
Squad
mean.
did it wrong, but that's one of the few. Yeah.
A bit too suave, perhaps. I prefer the Heath Ledger Crying Madness. Suicide Squad wasn't very theatrical, so I suppose we prefer the theatrical Heath Ledger kind of character,
Yep.
right?
Of course, the animated version was spectacular. It's
With
just one
Mark
of
Hamill
those
and all that.
really
Great,
enjoyable ones to dive into their madness a bit. And we discussed in the last
definitely.
podcast a bit about M. I'm not going to repeat too much about it, but with
Hmm.
Peter Lorre's character, just
Hmm.
the need to do bad things, the feeling that the world's bad and I'm one of the bad people in it, and I just
Yeah,
can't control who I am.
well,
It's
definitely.
so interesting to see it. And if you have not checked out, this is for the listeners, if you have not checked out my Determinism versus Free Will podcast, check that out and then check out the movie M because it really dives into it well.
Well, yeah, like this necessary evil that that evil has to exist. You also mentioned No Country for Old Men, right?
Yeah, before we started recording, I mentioned No Country for Old
Yeah,
Men with the character Anton there. The psychosis and the way I've heard it explained is that he feels the need to be evil in a way, or to be the one that can cause death. Like the Joker loves creating this chaos, but
yeah.
Anton needs to create the chaos.
Well, he feels it's his duty, I suppose, right?
Exactly,
Like well,
exactly. And
he's
as
there
a
for.
hitman, it's a perfect job for him.
Okay, okay. Well, I get it. Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like it reminds me of the film Leon by Luc
Oh,
Besson. It
Leon the
was Gary.
Professional.
Well, it's Gary Oldman, but no, two characters. It was Leon himself because he's not. I mean, come on, he's a hitman himself, right? I mean, he's killing and all that, but he sees it as a job. I mean, and you relate to him. On the flip side, there is the Gary Oldman character, who's a Joker character, I suppose.
Mm.
He's just loves the chaos, but he is supposed to be, in the eyes of law, the good guy. So it's a very strange movie because, I mean, he's in the police squad or something.
It takes the cliche of the
Yeah,
establishment, as we discussed last time, and really flips it on
yeah,
its head.
yeah. It does, right? That's great about him. Because all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
yeah.
what the good guys were not good at all. I mean, that's they're completely corrupt, and the hitman is actually trying to save a little girl, and so that's kind of great to mention as well, right?
Natalie Portman's
Yeah,
first role. I'm so glad
yeah,
you recommended that movie to me a couple of years ago. One of the best you've recommended.
no, it's a great movie. Watched it recently as well. So
Mm,
yeah, because it has so much to say. I mean, you can learn so much from it about so many things, right? I think more than anything for me, it is this idea of catharsis again, though. I mean, for me, that is a very emotional movie. They do it very well, but the music in it, the things that happen, yeah, and it does break a lot of. Again, it breaks so many cliches. I mean, the girl. I mean, that's a controversial thing, right? About a lot of people talk about the Matilda character is
mm.
controversial because she's so adult-like. But personally, I think it's just, I think that's silly. She's just a unusual kid who's very adult because she's forced to be adult. There's nothing weird going on there, as some people suggest. Personally,
Well, the thing is,
and
as well, like there were two versions of the movie. So one of
oh,
them
was it?
has like it's missing a scene where so
Okay,
you see like her in bed with Leon. One of the versions it seems extremely sexual, and another one of the
okay.
versions with depending on the scenes there, it actually comes across as very sweet.
That shows you that writing is really essential. So in this case, the
Oh yeah.
editing changes the nature completely, and also when you're writing something, the way you write it makes all the difference. So I talked last time about this new novel I'm working about, and there is a sex scene in it, and I have to be really careful to be honest about what vocabulary I use because if I say it that way, it sounds like they're just having mad kind of
Coitus.
senseless sex. And if I say it the other way, yeah, and if they say it the other way, it seems like they really love each other. It's all about the wording, the phrasing, the pacing. So I mean, writing, editing films, it's all music in the end.
Just
And
like
you have
regular
to.
sex, it just depends where you put it. Hmm.
Well, there you go. There you go. It's well, well put. So there you go. That's what. So now we're talking about format now, not really about themes. So I suppose
Which is fair.
what it reminds me now, Leon, about revenge as well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Leon is a revenge film more than anything, more than necessary evil film. It's just about her wanting to get back.
Yeah, great
Also
segue
interesting.
into another great theme that I completely agree with and do not have written down on my notepad here.
Okay, well there you go.
Re-
Revenge,
Revenge, great one.
and
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 on
you
again, my
you
favorite
have a
book.
book.
My favorite book is Count of Monte Cristo. I love that book so much. It goes into the revenge plot in such detail. You get to know the good guys, the bad guys, their whole families. I think it's Montego's father. There's that old man in it, still alive, and he's the one who takes small bits of poison every day. And
All right, okay, yeah.
just something about him and how he interacts with some of the other characters. It's just a page turner every time he's in the chapter. And I have still yet to see a movie do it well.
Okay, okay. Well, I have to read it then actually. So yeah, you mentioned that that's a great book
The greatest
for
revenge
revenge.
plot ever, I would say.
Okay, I've
Yep.
got a question actually. How
Sure.
how would one write a great revenge plot? So I feel like that's a very difficult type of story to write. Like whereas Lost, I feel like is easy as long as you don't get too emotional with it. I feel like a revenge plots. I mean, even the word just it's a plot first of all. So you have to think about two things. You have to
Yes.
think about what is the plot. So many elements to it, and you have to I think validate the anger, not just that oh he killed my my thought. I don't think it's enough to just write down a phrase. You have to really make a whole big argument about it. Reiterate. I think it's often about repetition, also revenge in the story. Sometimes even the phrasing becomes repetitive. I find as
Hmm.
well. Or the film that sometimes it's a repeated scene. It's things you can't. It's kind of like can't control obsessing over something. I think
Uh,
that happens in books as well.
I'm completely making this up, but I would say there's two schools of thought when it comes to making good
Yep.
revenge. One of them
Yep.
is go into the mind of the person wanting to have revenge, look at why he wants to kill the person, even dive into the insanity and what breaks his mind in a way. So there's like the normal mind, I'm putting in air quotes that you can't see. You just have no intent to kill. Most people don't want to
Mm-hmm.
kill anybody whatsoever. I think that's pretty
Yep.
normal. I hope
I
people
hope
won't
so.
debate me on that one. Uh,
Oh, Jesus.
but you can dive into the person's madness a bit. And the other one is a detective novel. This is
Mm,
when you can really look at the plot, kind of like what you were saying there. You look into the steps that need to be taken and have everything lead up to what finally happens at the end,
mm,
where he finally takes the final bit of revenge. So you can go piece by piece, taking a little bit from the person each time. Like the way the Count of Monte Cristo does it is he comes back as a count, not as Edmond Dantes. He
okay.
gets to know these people and starts just chipping away at their lives little by little in a way that they can't tell. Kind of like
Okay.
person digging out of a prison cell with a spoon, just little by little.
Yeah.
And then you get to finally see the foundation fail and everything crumble around the person. And that's what I find extremely interesting because it's like a mystery that needs to be thought out frontwards and backwards. You have to be able to look at the end and go back and connect every step. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting because yeah, because it's such a sequence of events, and again, you don't know what is going to happen, so it's completely unexpected. Like how he deal with loss, how are you going to react to it, and I think like I mentioned, Park Chan Wook, that I think people are interested in seeing how people react in extreme situations. Extreme situations lead to unusual events, and I think that's what people are interested in as well.
Yeah.
Because yeah, there is a morbid fascination with the darker elements of life, and that's what
Yeah.
revenge is. I mean,
The
why were they so popular during Shakespeare's era?
Yeah,
I mean, I think
exactly.
what
Like the best example of the former that I mentioned, looking at going into madness a little bit, is Hamlet. You get to see
exactly,
him experience depression and finally get to revenge.
yeah, exactly. And I think Hamlet is a very existentialist play, and it's in the sense that also, do you really trust Hamlet? Because a very modernist way of reading Hamlet, I'm sure this is not the way Shakespeare intended it. A different interpretation of Hamlet could be that Hamlet just imagined his father as ghost, and he's just,
Yeah.
he's a paranoid, delusional schizophrenic who belongs in a Philip K. Dick novel, rather than in a typical Shakespearean play. Yeah,
Yeah.
how do you really trust him? So I'm sure that that's not unusual for Shakespeare's era.
Well, he
That
just
there is that element,
he's jumpy when he kills Ophelia's father.
for example, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, but that adds some intrigue to it. So I mean, can you trust the character? I mentioned Mr. Robot to you before. So I mean, anyone listening, do yourselves a favor and watch it. It's a character you can't trust. You can't trust the character at all. It's just you can't trust his mental state. So again, that's what I'm interested in: mental illnesses and fiction. And when I mean mental illnesses, I just mean non-reliable author and these interior feelings or what you don't see. All that is there in Mr. Robot, and it does become very Shakespearean in the tragic sense. And I feel like cliches. I'm not sure about cliches in revenge. There are, of course, cliches, but I feel like there are less cliches in revenge or films or sorry books, films dealing with loss than there are in say action movies or adventures.
I definitely agree. Yeah, revenge. I think you can still fall into some of the traps of just the most basic revenge
Mhm.
story, if you create a plot that is too convoluted or is just very bland with not much happening, like you're only thinking about the end, you're not thinking about the steps that it takes to get there, I
Yeah,
think you're going to miss out on most of the plot. Like, just have a scene where they make a small win, and you're not focusing on what actually that does to the characters, what actually means for the rest of the story, and you're only
yeah.
worried about the ending. I think you're missing out on so much. And I forget the show that did it. I think it might have just been called Revenge, but it was boring.
Yeah, no, you got to make it. Also, you got to make it relatable. So if you want to seek revenge because your dad stole, the $1 million in your bank account, honestly, no one's gonna give a crap about that, unless you're Donald Trump or something like that. What I mean is that you got to make it something like something someone
So the
killed a
Italian Job?
family member. Well,
Oh,
someone. Well, I mean, like, well, for example, though, that you see, that's not. No, what I mean is that it's got to be something completely relatable. So everyone suffered loss. Can't be something too high class, sophisticated. Someone stole my diamond necklace. It has to be something like someone killed my father. So almost everyone can relate to that.
that one's
Almost
becoming a
everyone can.
cliche too, though.
It is becoming because you're overusing it. You see,
Like,
that's a different problem.
yeah, that's Hamlet,
Yeah.
that's True Grit, that's Princess Bride. Like,
Yeah, because I'm afraid that's so relatable that it's become a cliche, right? But it has to be
yeah.
something that I don't think can go too kind of odd. I mean, it can't be something like, oh, someone stole my, my pencil case.
What I like
Um,
about Count of Monte Cristo is it's basically you stole my life away from me. I went to prison for however many years.
well, that's relatable. See, that's completely,
Yeah.
because you relate to that. You see, Old Boy takes the same, similar format. So that's why I think you like Old Boy.
But you also
It's
get to
definitely influenced
experience
by
the
that.
time in prison with him. Like, that's a couple chapters in the book. You see what
That's
it's like in
important.
prison and how he escapes.
And you feel that time is passing slowly, perhaps, because it's so long. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like he's in prison and the next chapter is out. Well, you don't really relate to that. He suffered. You just, oh, well, it's not realistic anymore.
Hmm.
It's like when you do movies about the Holocaust, I think sometimes they make a movie about one person because you can relate to one person. It's like that theory, right, where you can relate to one death, maybe two, three, four, but you can't relate to a million. So after a while, the
Yep.
number becomes irrelevant. And the same as Monte Cristo, you have to see through the eyes of one person suffering, so a time of suffering, and then come out of it with him. Not just have a lapse of time, because that's no. Because where's the
Hmm.
build-up for the revenge? That's just, oh, 1 second he's happy, the next thing he's really angry, he's going to kill, and that's the end of the book. That's not gonna. I mean, if that were the book, no one would be reading the book either. So even if we're shorter, no one will be reading Monte Cristo. That's it.
Oh,
They
yeah.
read it because they've invested time in it as well. That's another thing about story. You are investing time and your energy and your empathy. You do need to do it as a writer. You have to engage the reader or the viewer, because if you're not doing that, then no one cares if the person dies at the end or if the
Yep.
world goes under. You just want the story at the end.
Definitely. Definitely. Like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of another one, but one of them I really enjoyed was The Devil's Arithmetic. I
Okay.
don't know if you've ever heard of this one, but it's basically
No.
it's a weird beginning. Like, it's a Jewish girl who does not appreciate her culture, and
Okay.
she ends up going back in time and lives through the Holocaust. And she basically goes
Interesting.
through, like, she loses a ton of weight. She has to go through all the chores. She sees people going into the gas chambers, and you get to see kind of through her eyes what it's like. But it's also what was the book by Elie Wiesel? Night, is that right?
Yeah, I think that's the one. I've heard of it.
Yeah, you get to experience. It's a autobiography basically of his experience in
All right.
the
Yeah.
concentration camps. That one we had to read in school, and whoo boy,
God, yeah. Jeez. Well, yeah, but it's the same idea that through one person, like Anne Frank, for example,
mm,
rather than just a factual kind of, 6 million
yep,
Jews were terminated. Yeah, and that's the thing about stories, right? So again, it's from reading the story about the Holocaust makes you relate with it more in an emotional level than purely scientific. And scientific knowledge is not going to stop people from committing World War III,
mm.
but rather the emotional kind of history.
You
The emotional
definitely
history
need
will stop.
both though, because
You
I've seen
do.
it a lot with, like, I really enjoy John Oliver. Like, he has a lot of interesting stories, and you learn a lot more than you'd expect from him. The one thing that gets on my nerves, though, and it works just like this for interesting storytelling, he gives case studies quite often. You get to hear one or two people's testimonies.
Okay.
I feel like he needs to focus a bit more on the more general numbers as well,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
the case studies don't represent the entire population all the time. So you do need to back it up with other
Was
numbers and
a general.
statistics, as well as
Yeah.
the emotional, heartfelt moments. Yeah.
Yeah. So you gotta maybe we gotta find the balance. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
exactly, exactly. But yeah,
All right.
I think we might have to wrap this one up soon. I don't think we have
All
time to
right.
talk
Yeah.
about like how we'd do some of these themes in our own writing, but if
Okay.
you're interested in hearing about what we do for different pieces, last week we talked about some things that we're interested in writing, and in the future we might take a look at some real writing prompts. Maybe prepare something, come back with it, or at least discuss some ideas and things we'd like to do with those ideas. Any last thoughts?
Well, I think, well, as you said, it's time to start writing, right?
It
So it's all
is.
very well theorizing it, but they can all be used as influences. But in the end, you just have to write down, avoid the cliches, not overthink it, and just get the story written down.
Yeah.
So this is all just helpful information, and it's supposed to be there as a guide. Now sit down and write. That's
Yeah.
what I recommend.
Like
Yeah,
that's, I feel
yeah,
like a normal college class, right? You start
exactly,
off learning about what we should and shouldn't do, the general rules of the class, and then after that, you can finally start.
exactly.
All right. So we might be back with a Writer's Workshop 3 in the future. Look out for that.
All
But
right.
next week is going to be more literature. This one's just going to be me. I'll go ahead and say I'll be ranking the entirety of Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies. Next week is
Ooh,
going to be ranking Shakespeare's tragedies, I think. All right. I'm
okay.
probably going to stay
Tough
away from
task.
the histories because I don't have all that time right now. Uh,
You need a lot of time for that.
I
You need a
do.
lot of time for
I
the histories.
do. And I also need to care about the histories. And I will forget every single Henry there is.
Fair enough. Well, there are a lot of them, so
Yeah.
you can be forgiven.
All right. Well, PJ, thank you so much for joining me.
All right, thanks, Alex. It's been fun.
It's been great. All right.
Yeah.
So that will be it again for this week. Again, next week I'll be looking at some more of the Shakespeare discussion, ranking the best and worst tragedies and the best and worst comedies for the next 2 weeks. But as always, we're here and we're listening.